And by the way, if Trump would ever hear this, they're not just coming for you, they're coming for your family. All of them. They will throw your asses in prison the rest of your life or worse. What's up, Kasimir?
Hey, can you hear me?
Yep.
All right. The Trump and Republicans white pill.
There we go. From the ANCAPs. There we go.
From the ANCAP.
Yeah.
Well, so Trump did two things, right? He slowed the process by 4 years, created a distraction.
Yep.
And if you knew about the plans between Obama and Clinton, like the laws that were being implemented, delaying them was just an amazing level of success. The other thing he did is he triggered the total dropping of the mask.
Yeah, I agree with that.
That never existed. And it is just very difficult to find people on the ground that are that I would say matter, that still believe in the mask.
Yeah,
like young Republicans who are anti-Trump. To me, that sounds like a unicorn.
Yep.
The only person who can be anti-Trump among the Republicans is either a pundit who expects a job at CNN at one point, so they're playing the patsy Republican on air.
Yep.
Or like your grandparents that are voting for their the time before last possibly, and they just like everybody to be nice and gentlemanly, right? Because that's the illusion that was created by the media, as if everybody else is nice,
right?
Really, the illusion that the United States is nice has been devastated. And that is the point where that is the pressure point. The pressure point for the Republican, quote unquote Republican that claims, "Oh, I'll never vote for Trump," is to ask him, "Do you believe that it's constitutional for people to film themselves in the halls of Congress having..."
1 second. Thank you so much, Gorpsink, for the raid. We're talking to my friend Kasimir here. We're getting white pilled on Trump. Now, which I am
on
Trump. But yeah, so thank you, Gorpsink. Really appreciate it, man. Or lady.
We have these beautiful quote unquote images of a man on his bent over a table, filming himself getting things done to him,
right?
Let's just say,
yep.
in the holiest of holies, yep. in the House of Representatives.
Yep. No, it's not a crime though. It's not a crime, right?
No, it's in fact we're proud of that yep. guy. He did more to unmask the government than many others. So, and that is a white bill. Now, the last thing, so this is why it's a win-win. If Trump wins, then this system, regardless of the level of his influence, there's going to be infighting for another 4 years. And that's pessimistic. If Trump doesn't actually manage to clean anything, he will at least stop progress,
right,
quote unquote, for another 4 years, because they'll be too busy fighting him. And if he loses, it is still a white pill, because there are a lot of Republicans, a lot of people who still believe in politics. And it's impossible to argue with them. They're like, no, we must be nice. We can vote this out. Yes, the Democrats are cheating, but if we just vote hard enough,
right,
then we will get such an amount of votes that they will never be able to like openly reinforce the election to that level. We're not the Russian Federation. We don't have a single party that just writes whatever number it wants. That only happens in Russia and maybe Brazil and maybe other countries in the world if you look hard enough. But not here. We can still, it's still democracy. So all of that either has to start working or has to die. And in any case, it's a white pill. Because
No.
what happens next is going to be better than than living in a trance. And so Trump, people look at the qualities that Trump has. I have an entire debate prepared on this. Every single negative quality that is hated about Trump, almost every single one, is crucial for his very existence.
Yeah.
If he was not a narcissist, he would not be here.
That is absolutely true.
If he was not suicidal, so narcissist, he's willing to harm himself and his children in favor of his ego, he would be rationally out of there.
Right.
No billionaire is going to do what he's doing. You can forget about it. If somebody is like DeSantis, this is the problem with DeSantis. He does not have billions of dollars to spend on lawsuits. DeSantis getting sued like Trump would fold immediately simply because he's a good man and family comes first.
Yep.
And Trump is a bad man. For him, family doesn't always come first. He comes first. And that has a huge advantage. Now, his only weakness, I would say, is that once in power, he will probably try folding again.
Right.
He will try to, because it's the easy way. It's to like try to compromise with the deep state, and they sort of know it. He's not completely suicidal, but then no one is.
Right. No, you're absolutely right. So everything you said is right. First off, the reason I voted for Trump in 2016 and the reason that I was going to vote for him in 2020, there were two reasons. As a basically single issue voter that's concerned about the issue of corruption, I voted for Trump first and foremost because I knew, not because he was playing 4D chess, not because he's some genius. I do think he's a very smart man and he's very talented. I'm not begrudging him, but it had nothing to do with that. The mere fact that he was someone that was seen as a potential outsider would force the hand of these institutions to take the mask off. Not because Trump was playing 4D chess, just the fact that when you have total power and someone comes in that you're afraid could upset that apple cart, you can't accept that. You can't accept it. And so they would go full mask off. And that 100% happened. Anyone who's remotely objective, that remotely pays attention, can no longer deny that we have no official legacy media. It's just state propaganda. That all of these institutions, from the corporate America to social media companies to, algorithms that are being used on search engines, etc., they're all in on these pro-establishment narratives. Period. They're all on the same team. The mask is off. It's not independent. Right? That's 100% proven. They are willing to do anything to maintain power. They're willing to sanction or ignore actual riots that were occurring. They thought those riots were good. They liked them because they thought it hurt Donald Trump. They were willing to hope and cheer for COVID being devastating and for devastating the economy because they thought it hurt Donald Trump. Nothing was off the table, and the average person could look and see with absolute clarity that the mask is off like it's never been before. Trump accomplished that. And Trump did that using the personal foibles or characteristics that we could say could possibly be detrimental. You're absolutely right. You'll never get to a financial position of a person like him unless you have these sort of narcissistic characteristics, unless you're an extreme risk person who doesn't take personal harm and things like that as a very serious, or you're willing to accept that because of your ego. That's all true. It's all true. And the people and I criticize Trump an awful lot for the decisions he made, but I also am quick to say he did something that probably no one else in the country could have done. He won that 2016 election. He won it, and no one that was outside the orthodox sort of position of politics would have ever had a chance to do that. It would require a very unique person, a person with his unique characteristics, his financial fortunes, his connections, his attitude, his ability to be charismatic and connect to people. None of that could ever be taken away. Give me 1,000 lifetimes and I could never do what Trump did there. Period. End of story. So for all of my Monday morning quarterbacking, he should have done this, this, and this. That's the absolute truth about Trump. So you're absolutely right about his characteristics. The second reason I voted for Trump was to do something about the corruption. Unfortunately, he failed, and he'll probably fail again. But the mere fact that he would be elected, just like in 2016, the mask, as great as it's off now, will come off even more strikingly. And really, isn't that all you could ask? If you're someone in my position that feels that this system's corrupt, and that ultimately even corrupt institutions within the Republican Party would stymie Trump actually doing anything serious to end this corruption, what chance does anyone really have? Would Vivek be able to do it? Would DeSantis? Probably not, if I'm totally honest. So what more can I ask for than at least put the buffet out there for the people? And if the people decide through weakness, through ignorance, through apathy, to say, we see the lies, we see it before us, we see the corruption, and we don't give a shit, then we get what we deserve. Then I am content knowing I tried the right thing, and I'm content knowing I'm still going to do my best with my family, and I'm not predicting some Mad Max apocalypse. I'm not saying that. But what more could you ask for, I guess? So I agree with you. And when I say, but the truth is, in every little step, like I said, I think the chance of me having any real impact on the election, just like any of us, is pretty low. I think the chance of Trump winning is pretty low. I think the chance of Trump wins that he actually understands, like, holy shit, this is how corrupt it is. We need, like, these people are out to, like, they're literally out for my blood. And by the way, if Trump would ever hear this, they're not just coming for you, they're coming for your family. All of them. They will throw your asses in prison the rest of your life, or worse. They will. That's how important it is for them to keep any potential outsider. That's what they'll do, But even if he would somehow realize the extent of it, I don't think that he could do anything really other than slow the mechanisms, So for someone in a position like me, it's just like when I have a day like today where you see it's like, holy shit, Johnson goes back at his promise. Now we're going to fund Ukraine. We're still not funding border security. They just recently passed the no warrants needed for FISA. They are funding the FBI. They passed this $1 trillion spending bill. Fiscal conservatives in the House did all this, folks. Fiscal conservatives. And then when you see Trump out there piling around with Johnson like, yeah, he's my boy, he's doing good. It's like, holy cow. You just have to shake your head and say, my God. And then you start to evaluate things. You're like, well, it would, if you were a Democrat, all of a sudden you would get all this dopamine rush of these wins. You would sell out and you'd get bigger channel growth and you would grow. I'd never do it, though. I was just being tongue-in-cheek with the title here. Is it time to officially become a Democrat? Of course not. Of course I wouldn't do it. But I'm trying to make the point, like, my goodness, to put so much energy into people that represent your beliefs like 10%. Knowing that the chances of, like, significant change, it is sort of, But yeah, you're right. The things you say are white pills about it. And more importantly, I remember talking to you one time. It stuck with me, and I haven't implemented this. You were talking to me about this guy. Maybe you'll remember his name. And I think it was you telling me this. And you said that this guy kind of was pseudo-black-pilled about politics and culture.
Yes.
And so his answer...
It's funny. You're about to say what I was about to say just now.
Yeah. Where his answer...
I wonder if you remember his name.
I do not. But you were like, his answer is radical self-improvement.
Yes.
And that stuck with me.
Yes.
I think that's brilliant. I think it really is. That is the answer. That it's like,
Listen, there is a moment. So we have to, like, speak with allegories and sort of historical examples here. There was a long time in the Soviet Union where if you were to speak openly against the regime, everybody was writing into their desk, basically. Mm-hmm. There was no illusion of any freedom. And so people didn't even have, like, podcasts or anything. They would write their criticism and their political opinions into the table, like, literally, meaning, like, in hiding, and then people would photocopy to distribute their books. That's how the political discourse existed, mm-hmm. even though the system was fairly quote-unquote liberal towards the end, meaning you weren't, like, oppressed by getting killed. You would be, like, put in the mental institution. Worse come to worse, right. If you're a political leader of the opposition. And most of them went through that, even some writers that I like that are very benign went through, like, a year or two in a mental facility, because they were, a bit too open with it.
Right.
But towards the end, there was this idea that everybody knew that the system is a lie, that it's based on nothing, and then eventually one day it just collapsed. Now the trick is what happens the day after the collapse, and the trick, and if you listen to Curtis Yarvin, he does this all the time, where he's trying to soften the blow. He says to the other side, all we're going to do is to force you to retire. We'll even pay your retirement fund in your, funny money, and you'll live comfortably ever after. All you have to do is resign. So, there's not going to be like a kangaroo court, or like a trial for all the people, all the collaborators. Well, we'll just allow you to retire, because the economy will absorb the blow, your little parasitism. As long as you're away from the levers of power, we're happy. And that is like a partial truth. But what needs to happen is that in the moment where the country requires them, the new elite has to come in, and it has to come in really, really hard in terms of replacing the old one, and not allowing like some kind of bullshit like happened in Russia to happen in the United States.
Right.
So that is the people who you're talking to. This is one of them is going to be possibly a member of that future elite, or is going to talk to somebody like that. And so that is the people who you're preparing. That's the sort of the white pill. Whether it happens now or in 100 years,
right,
doesn't really matter. The white pill is every time a good idea is mentioned, like you said, with the Mrs., even though they're calling him Mises,
right,
which is annoying. So that's one of them, right? The other white pill is that we're not Russians. We're not a country that spent 70 years in like slavery or more, probably hundreds of years. Instead, we have hundreds of years of the highest level of freedom on planet Earth. And the white pill is the response of armed people to both lockdowns and like all the pandemic nonsense and all the riot stuff. It is that we have a lot of people who are on the ground very free, and the system is trying to oppress them and to like lure them into self-enslavement. But every time they do, people just buy more guns.
Mm-hmm.
Like gun sales are accelerating. That is your major white pill. It's impossible for it's possible for cops in New York City to take on the Antifa communists and beat them up with nightsticks. And because the Antifa communists in New York City are disarmed, because they voted to be disarmed, then nothing happens. Like nobody gives a damn. It's impossible to do that in Virginia, like outside of DC.
Mm-hmm.
It's just impossible. If you see how police behave, they're very polite. It was impossible for the federal government to do that on the Bundy Ranch, where they just wanted to take his cattle away,
right,
and they couldn't. So this is what the regime is trying to hide from you. That's why J6 is so important, because it obscured all of the peaceful protests that were armed, where everything was achieved.
Yep.
And the way it does, it obscures them, and then it enacts like revenge on people in the background by jailing individuals. So it's still this dissident activity is still very risky in the United States.
Well,
because of the way they work.
So here's two more white pills I thought of that it should be said. So for one, having a kid, for me, here's a white pill I have. Although it is true that if this sort of cultural Marxist shit would continue, that my son will face discrimination based on the color of his skin and his sexual orientation, etc., etc. Here's the real truth. If you have kids and you're thinking about the future, anything bad could happen at any time to an individual, don't get me wrong. But in general, on the aggregate, if you instill in your children the values of, hard work and, the values of being a decent person, your kid's going to be a king or a queen, because there are so many people that are raising their children in such pathetic, soft ways. We're still going to need competent people. We're still going to need people at the heads of institutions. And if you, in a world where more and more people are becoming more and more entitled, inevitably, the system will get to the point. DEI will only take you so far until things start to break apart, and then someone competent's got to move in. So I always look at that as a white pill, where it's like, look, it's not going to become Mad Max. It'll become a situation where you're going to have, sadly, more and more people that are just trailing off, that are totally reliant on the government, and the government's not going to take good care of them. But the few people that choose a different path are going to be highly in regard. So that's one. The other thing is, and this is petty, and sometimes I feel bad even saying it, but not really. I love the fact that deep down, I don't even know if I could say this on YouTube, but you know the old quote, I forget who it was, someone in Stalin's regime, that kind of, I believe they're talking about academics specifically, and they're like, the academics will be one of the first people basically to be lined up against the wall. They're useful for us to initiate, right, our revolution, and then they are no longer useful once a certain period of time comes. It is petty, and I continue to fight for what I think's right, even for people that I disagree with. But there is some sort of catharsis knowing the people that screech the loudest for their own enslavement will get it worse than any of us. And there is something about that makes me chuckle. That's like, that's okay. I'll come on and I'll debate these people, and they'll, and we'll go back and forth, and I would still help those people out. I would, within reason. I'm not like an ubermensch that's just going to go out and help people to my own detriment. But I don't have a bone in my body where I wish ill on even most of these ridiculous people that I interact with or debate. But I know deep down it won't matter. I know deep down that they're going to pay the price. When the shit hits the fan, I happen to live in a place that geographically is very favorable. There are natural resources. I live in a very low populated area with wildlife, farms, clean drinking water, neighbors that give a shit. And I'm not saying it'll always be a utopia, but my situation will be far better than those that live in inner city with no skills whatsoever. So I know that it's not the best way to look at things, and it seems petty.
No, it's the correct way to look.
Yeah, I can't help it. I can't help. There is part of you, like there is this duality in me that's like, I see the woman getting the shit beat out of her in New York City and then doing the TikTok video like, oh my God, and there's part of me that says, okay, reach out to people like that and say, yeah, see, this is what we are warning you about. You need to start thinking about things differently. The way you vote, the way you approach things culturally is different. And that's true. We should be doing it. But part of you just wants to say, ha, 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 ha. How'd that taste? How'd that feel? Sucked, didn't it? Ah, that's a goddamn shame, isn't it? Too bad there weren't cops around, huh? Oh, you voted for defund the police shit, right? And you're going to vote that way again, There's party, and I suffer from this because, like, I'll tell you right now, I know he's not listening, but I'll tell you right now, my good friend that I was talking about earlier, that this dude on a weekly basis is calling me, and he works for a nationally known company, and he's like, you would shit your pants if you see how DEI is being implemented at this company. He's like, it's fucking insane. This is a Democrat, and he's telling me this. He's like, you would not believe it. This place is going to fall apart. That, like, their competence is like the very last thing they give a shit about at this point. At this point, they're all in on checking boxes. And he goes on and he's like, I'm never going to get a promotion. I'm miserable at work. I work with a bunch of incompetent people. My workload's tripled because no one that I work with could do anything. And yet I'm still looked at as the villain because of my skin color and because of my, sex and all this stuff and blah, 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 blah. And I feel bad for him. And I talk to him at great length about it. And then every conversation I end with, who are you voting for? Biden. Okay. Like, where's my role there? Is it not allowed for me to laugh at him and be like, sorry, dude. Sorry. Like, I don't know what to tell you, man. I'm not saying that's the only if you would have voted for Trump, this wouldn't have happened. But you didn't give a shit. You didn't care. You were like, nah, it's all blown out of proportion. Then it came to your doorstep. And even when it's entering your door, you're like, well, it's still better than the alternative. Okie dokie. Let me know.
That will always happen. People, you have real stories about this, where people are party members sent into exile, and they're like in a labor camp felling trees, and going to their deathbed saying the party was wrong about me. I'm not a traitor.
Yeah.
And because they became like a necessary statistic for somebody to get a promotion. And they're delusional until the end. I think it's also funny. This is another white pill. There's a Democrat or sort of leftist trope that, reality is leftist. That's why we're always winning. Reality is leftist. And if you look at their media, what they're creating, or if you look at reality, it's obviously the opposite. It's obviously that reality is very harshly non-leftist. It is right-wing in a sense. And you can see that, for example, recently, there is this cultural phenomenon. They released the Fallout series, TV series. I was going to say, and you can watch it. Most people who watch it will not notice all the propaganda. Like, this is an overtly communist show. It even removes the mask entirely at one point or the other. And it tries to make various right-wing positions appear cartoony and funny and sort of wrong, but it cannot help but make them appear appealing.
Right.
Like, it just cannot. It's like it mocks Americana. So the whole idea of Fallout was like light mockery of everything,
right,
including Americana. In this show, in the TV version, they just retcon and append everything to make Americana look like the force of evil, actually. But they still can't do it. It just doesn't work. They can't show you like an ideal society and then show you literally what they're trying to do, on the outside, an apocalypse, and make you root for, the mutant. It's just very hard to do, and they fail.
Well, it's like that.
And I think that's the other white pill is that people understand, like, when reality starts affecting them, a lot of people will wake up. So a lot of people in the lockdowns and in the riots bought guns.
Yep. Yeah, I totally agree. I wish you were listening earlier. So there was this guy that called in. It was surreal. He argued with me in the chat yesterday. And I mean, I'm not really talking about the race aspect of this, because I know when you bring this up, people talk about the race. That's not what I'm doing. But have you heard the discourse on, like, people that can't understand hypotheticals? Like, it's literally, and I know ladies I've seen, like, I know Andrew did this in the Whatever podcast. Like, what'd you have for breakfast? What if you had X for breakfast? But I didn't have breakfast. Right. Exactly. That's how this guy was yesterday. Couldn't understand a hypothetical. So he calls in today. And the argument that we're going to have is, I said that corrupt institutions are worse than corrupt individuals. So if you theoretically have a corrupt senator or a corrupt president, that could be a big deal. But a bigger deal would be a corrupt FBI, a corrupt, I think that's self-evidentiary. Why? This guy disagreed, right? So he wants to call in and talk about it. And he says at one point, as he's struggling through the conversation, he says, "Fuck the world." I was like, what? He's like, "I just want to say fuck the world." And I said, okay. And he said, "Why do you work?" And I was like, I thought he meant, like, why do I advocate the political positions I do? And I'm like, well, what do you mean? He said, "I know your job is working with people with developmental disabilities. Why do you go to work?" And I said, "Oh, to get an income to provide for my family." And he said, "But why? So that your family could work?" And I was like, what do you mean? So my family could be happy, so we could spend time together that's meaningful, to not suffer, to do entertaining things, enjoyable things. He says, "You just work so that they could go to work. And the cycle will repeat." He didn't say it in that way because he didn't have the ability to articulate it. And then I was like, "Are you depressed?" And he's like, "I don't want to talk about it." I was like, "You're depressed? Is that how you view life?" I said, "What's your job?" He said, "I'm a truck driver." I said, "So that's how you view your job? You work every day just to go to bed and wake up and work the next day. You need some fulfillment in your life. You need to talk to someone. That's not a healthy way to live." And he's like, no. And he's like, "That's what you're saying. You just work to work. It's inevitable. It's inevitable. You just work to work." And I was like, "But you think..."
Ridiculous.
I was like, "But you think that way because you're projecting your views onto me. You can't understand that someone could be a happy person, have a loving family, and be very happy. You don't understand it. You think that if I work, it's only because I'm forced to work." And so, anyways, not to go through all the gory details, he basically just becomes a communist, is what he's advocating for. And he says, any system that requires you to work is immoral. And I said, "Oh, well, then what kind of system are you advocating for? What does that look like?" And he hems and haws, and finally he comes up with this hypothetical. He said, "Would it really be that bad if we just had one state, like Montana, that said anyone that comes here will give everything they want? Video games, food, housing." Right, that's what he said. And I was like, "Are you serious?" And he's like, "Yeah." I was like, "Okay, let me explain that. I'm like, what is the government? And then he got all pissed off like I was playing semantic games. I was like, no, what I'm trying to get is the government's not some magical entity. They don't create things, right? The government is just the collective property of the people. That's all it is. It's not free shit, man. Like, who's going to pay for and create all the PlayStation?
No, there's a... Wait, Rob, there's a worse part of this. I mean, obviously, yes, that part is delusional. I agree. Like, you can't... The other people's money will run out, and then he'll starve. But the attitude itself is like an attitude of just complete self-enslavement.
Sure.
Because he doesn't understand that. So why do I go to work? Well, obviously partly because of the compensation, but I wouldn't work in a position where I would create chaos.
Correct.
Like, and I tell
you
that,
see value, right?
I have conversations with my boss where he would like ask me, well, why you're doing this, or why you're resisting, this decision or the other, and I tell him quite openly, in other words, like, I don't generate chaos. Like, if you like my work, you can keep me hired, but if you ask me to generate chaos, I will, it's at will. I will walk out, even if it means that, I have to suffer for a few months until I find another steady place. I'm not going to create chaos. I'm not going to put my signature with my name on an email lying to a client or doing anything, or like delaying service when I can provide it, or doing anything else that is like that is chaos generating, that is dishonest. And so and that's what's inspiring me to go to work.
Well, right.
And why I enjoy my job, because I provide a service to people, meaning I participate in a trade economy where what we're doing is we're creating order, or more order than there was in every single decision, and we're valued for things like consistency, reliability, for being honest and upfront with customers, and basically for it's being honest traders. Let's just say,
right.
It doesn't matter what we're trading. We're providing. We're telling you upfront what will happen, and then if you want, you receive the service, and order gets restored. And so, if he is driving a truck and he doesn't have that mentality, he should not drive a truck. He should find maybe some other employment.
That's right.
Where he will get that feeling, and that's the best feeling in the world. Honestly, I can be after like a 60-hour incredibly busy week, feeling happy about myself regardless of anything else. If I'm getting paid what I was agreed to getting paid, and if I've created order in my life and the life of others, and I can sense that from calling to people. I entered a new field. A lot of the people I call to are getting paid way more than I am, and they are in like these more corrupt institutions, most likely, where they don't get a lot of order. They're surrounded by levels of chaos that are just unfathomable to me. But when they call to me, they're happy because they know that if I promise something, I'm going to deliver it, or they're going to hear about it, that it's not happening. Like, they're not going to be ghosted or anything of the sort.
Yeah, and
so that is fulfilling. Like,
that's right. And so then, like, on that level of it, right? Like, if you've ever seen the show Dirty Jobs with Mike Rowe, it's something that he talks about quite frequently. Like, how could you be someone that works in some sewage pipe and you ain't becoming a millionaire? You're paid okay, but you go to work in this disgusting job, and he says it all the time. He's like, they're the happiest people I know. That guy's entire career, job at that point, was going around to jobs that the average person would be like, that looks like the worst job in the world. It looks physically intensive. It looks gross. And yet the people that did those jobs were completely fulfilled. Why? Because they recognized, and the way you're putting it, they're creating order. They're providing a service. They're doing something that is not ambiguous. It is a necessity. It is a good. They're doing something for society as a whole that is inenviable, that other people won't do, but they do it with a smile on their face because they know they're providing something that's important to society, and they're being compensated and then being able to provide for their families. And there's just a tiny correction.
It's not for society. It's for your personal vision of what you want the world to
Right,
be.
that's true.
It's a slight different. There's absolutely no self-sacrifice, and that's because as soon as the if society or my boss or anyone else would ask me to do something that I'm like not okay with, like generating anything chaotic, like lying or doing anything of the sort, then I'm out. Like I'm off to the next place.
Sure.
Where order can be created, and I really like almost don't care what it is, as long as I'm physically capable of doing it.
Yeah, and so then going to what he was talking about his utopian vision of Montana, clearly there are production related problems, right? So you know how he gets out of that. This is what he says. He goes, but wait. I said it's not like they have a magic wand. He says, for my hypothetical, they do. So now the hypothetical has changed to literally the government of Montana are wizards and literally can create matter out of thin air. Whatever you want, they wave a wand and you get it. And he says, surely there'd be no harm in that. Of course there is. Of course there's harm in that. Even if that would solve the production side, you need meaning as a person. And I talked to him about, I don't know if you've ever heard about the mouse utopia experiments, right? Where the idea was that they gave these colonies of mice everything they could want, excess food, everything, so they didn't have to do any task. And it fell into like depravity. They grouped off into cliques.
I don't think it's fully analogous to humans, but I'm aware of
right.
theory.
Of course, it's not fully analogous, but that idea is actually true. And you could look at this in populations like in San Francisco with the homeless populations, where they're like, let's give them more. Let's give them free needles. Let's give them free drugs. Let's give them free apartments. Let's give them free food. Did it improve the quality of their life? No. In fact, by most metrics, particularly when they had this experiment when they were giving all of these homeless drug addicts apartments, almost every negative value you could associate with life increased with those people. So they became more addicted to drugs. They used more. There
is a problem there. What San Francisco does is it doesn't give many people apartments because that's like those programs actually fail. What they do is the reason why they have homeless is they prevent construction. And what's worse is that there are stories out of San Francisco and Los Angeles where the homeless are building their own homes. They're like homesteading, areas under bridges and unused lots. And they're trying to build something. Sometimes they do it right on the street. They're building a tiny home of their own, using their own materials, using donations. There was a guy who was donating money and was creating these, pre-built little tiny homes for the homeless. And they would use those some of them as a way to like keep slowly dying, but some of them were able to have a place where they can, shower and sleep in safety, and that would allow them to accumulate some wealth and buying clean clothes and starting to go to work and doing other positive things in their life. And then the local government said, no, we're not allowing social activity through the market or through people helping each other. It can only go through enslavement to us. They're not willing to have, this guy free. He has to be part of their system. Even if their system is going to only help him in like 30 years or never, he has to go through the system. And so they demolished all of that. They're demolishing all of these homes. They're demolishing every effort of people being independent. And that's the reason why they have so many homeless, is that they're preventing people from growing. I
know, but there were specific examples where they were implementing small scale programs where they did like 1,000 apartments they're giving, and the people that they put in those apartments did worse. Anyways, the point, it's the same.
Yes, because part of the fulfillment is that you don't get like a full apartment. You have to like pick up the hammer.
Right.
Hammer
That's exactly right. That's right. That's exactly right. And it's the similar thing I'm sure you've heard anecdotally, but I bet the data would bear this out. How many, particularly men, do you know that reach retirement age that are seemingly in good health, and then within 3-4 years they end up passing away? Because it's like they've lost a sense of purpose, something that was very core to them. And when they stop having, that fulfillment that comes from working and doing. Anyways, the point is, it's like, the reason I bring this whole thing up is it's unbelievable when we're talking about sort of people waking up and some people won't, like when you listen to these people talk about this stuff, this guy was 30 years old, he said, it's amazing to me. It makes me realize, it's another white pill for me to realize just how lucky I am. It's like, my God, I can't imagine going through life saying, if only I never had to do anything. If only we didn't have this damn system. And then we got into even more fundamental base stuff. Like, for example, this guy started telling me, it was immoral or whatever that he had to work. And I said, but you've always had to work. Even in pre-capitalist societies, you would still work. Like, you still had to use your labor to acquire resources. That's still work. And he's like, well, I wish that we lived in a society where I could just walk to the woods and just be there. And I was like, but you can. You can do that. You can go to the wood. Now, arguably, there are some violations you could run afoul of if you're on people's land, et cetera, et cetera. But within reason, like, there are areas of the world you can go to. You can fly into Canada and drop off in the middle of the woods and have at it.
Yeah, that's cool. He would never survive.
Well, by the way, not only would he not survive, he says this shit with a straight face. I'm not kidding you. This is what he says. He says, it's like, didn't you say, though, that you like computers and video games? He says, okay, I would work 1 week to pay for a computer, and then I would be set. I said, in the woods. He said, yeah. I'm like, where are you getting electricity? He says, solar panels. And I said, solar panels? So you have the ability to build a home and do your own wiring that would exist on solar panels? Like, where are you getting your internet?
There's a word for this. There's a word for this, which comes from Ayn Rand, and she coined some brilliant words. And this word is called evasion. He's a second-hander, and he's an evader. Mm-hmm. And what evaders do is every time they encounter, like, a rational impediment that requires them to recognize reality, they invent some mystical solution that allows them to evade. Now, you have to get up and go generate order to put food on the table and to trade for the food that the farmer provides. And then they generate an evasion. Well, what if we had robots produce all the food for us? Then I wouldn't have to barter for it. It could be just distributed by another robot, and then it would just fall into my mouth, and I could be lazy on the couch. That's evasion. Right? Because if that system existed, if that Montana existed where you could go and the government had all the resources in the world, had like a replicator, why the hell would they need him?
Right.
The first thing they would do to him is euthanize him.
Right.
Because why help him? He's a waste of resources. He doesn't need to be there. And also, and this is his partly possibly because the job is not a good one because he needs to be like more social, and the job keeps him alone and like in his truck listening to lefty radio shows or something. But so there's like maybe some personal issues there, but that's the real hellscape. It's feeling it's like feeling useless. That's a curse.
And it's amazing to me, and like I can't, like, I think I've told you this before, but this is a true story. It might have been socialism done left, though I doubt, because he at least has a little more common sense to make this claim. But it was someone like that. I was on a panel, and it's a socialist that I'm arguing with. And I was like, can we at least say this? If you're looking at human history as a whole, like from the beginnings of recorded history, even before then, right? Can we admit that we're pretty lucky to live now, right? All things considered, the majority of human history, pretty brutal. Right? Pretty brutal history. So there are certainly a lot of things I complain about in our society now, and there are certain things that are worse. But in general, if you take the entire span of human history, and I was like, particularly if we live in a country like the United States, and I'm not kidding you, this socialist said to me, living in the United States right now is the single worst time to be alive and place to be alive in the entire history of humanity. So
yeah, it's a complete delusion.
You could point out, be like, but we could literally point to like genocides that have occurred so recently that there were video cameras to record them. Like, these aren't myths. You can see this. You can see Pol Pot. We can see.
No, it's the perfect evasion. The other evasion is they have this belief in they have like this belief that in the paradise, that we lived in paradise prior to capitalism, and they have these visions of happy Native American barter societies where you brought in some apples and the other person brought in some pears and somebody brought in, whatever animal they hunted, and then they all happily traded. And it's just like, it's childish. And part of it is because they live their entire life in as parasites being fed by people who are partially or completely enslaved. They live in a parasite bubble where they grow up, their parents provide for them, then they go to college where they just walk into the cafeteria and they get fed, right, on the government dime or on their parents' dime, but on someone's dime, and they don't have to work for it. And so they believe, and so they don't see the order generating. They don't generate order themselves, and so they don't understand what it requires. They don't understand the amount of trade that it requires for them to have that specialized of a life where they are allowed to be academics. That's what they don't see.
Yeah.
And this is why, as children, they're supposed to have, field trips. This is your chicken. This is what it takes to, to grow it. This is what it takes. This is what it takes to create a pencil in our economy. We don't have a person who understands how to do it. You can't have an expert that can build you a pencil.
Right.
It's impossible. You have to combine dozens of industries that you start going down the branches, you discover the rest of society. That's the reality that we live in. We're so integrated. And in the past, people were just dreaming about it. And that's the other illusion. Capitalism, it's a bad word, free trade or people trading was the reality for most of human history. And the richest humans were the people were rich based on how much trade they could do, meaning how much specialization they could do between different regions. Trade is just like a way to specialize, a way to do things efficiently with one group, because it's not efficient to do, a tiny part of a big job all the time. It's not efficient to grow your food and also create all your clothes and also create all your shoes and also create all your entertainment, because there's no human that's good at everything.
Right.
People specialize. They prefer a particular occupation. And the reality is, you look back in time, you see more gradients of that, and you see humanity gradually starting to realize that specialization and trade is an advantage. Trade families becoming incredibly powerful, and then that eventually pushes certain parts of the world with certain geographies into opening up the sciences, into opening up, and then you see the extreme acceleration of economic growth.
Yeah,
but
it's
a good historical lesson, if you allow. The steam engine was delayed by something like 10 or 20 years by patents, where people just waited for the person who held the patent to die. Mm-hmm. And when they died, humanity accelerated.
Yeah.
That is how petty and stupid it can be sometimes.
Yeah.
You can just think, our entire development. So right now you have an iPhone or in your pocket and a cell phone, but 20 years ago you did not have that. Imagine what it would be if that guy who invented the steam engine, if he lived 20 years more and the entire timeline of technology shifted 20 years forward. You would have to wait 20 more years to do what we're doing right now.
Yep.
Now, if you view history that way, you understand how crucial it was for the United States to exist, because the United States was this time in history where there was so much freedom here because he just couldn't chase people down here, couldn't go oppress all the states. It was too far away from the grasp of empire, too many open spaces and open resources. And so that's why we had all of the technological progress that we did in the world, because both the United Kingdom and the United States liberated on a massive scale. That's the white pill. And now we're our decaying civilization trying to push us back into this mass enslavement to the system. It's living on the back of that huge explosion of freedom and progress.
Right. And that's what you always hear about the socialist Scandinavian countries. It's right. because they've achieved great wealth because prior to being socialist, they embraced these sort of free trade mindsets, and now they had a homogenous society where everyone was starting off with a base level of wealth, so it's easy. What you can't do then is have a diverse society, particularly when you're bringing people in the lower economic ends of things, and continue that sort of like it's just, I mean, I don't know how to say it. Everyone knows this shit too. That's the funny part. Everyone knows it, right? Like you absolutely, like I'll give you an example. I have all these friends that I met through the local college I went to here and got my undergrad. It was a state university called Clarion University, right? And I had all these, most of the people I knew from the debate team there were centrist to left-wing, we'll say. There weren't many extremist left, but some of the professors I became friends with were left Democrats, centrist Democrats, or even further than that. And they would routinely talk about the need to government to manage resources and manage the economy. So there was a science building, and because this is a state university, they get state funding, that was being built there. And it took like 4 or 5 years for them to build it. And on the side of the science building, there's just not a particularly attractive looking, but just a piece of copper. Just big green copper that's going down the side of it in like a line. And I was like, I asked the professor friend of mine that was a professor of biology, I believe. I was like, does that have significance? Like, what's the idea with this? What is it? And he's like, oh, it's copper. And I asked them, and we asked around and we got answers. You know why they put that there? Because the budget that was given for that particular university by the government was X amount of dollars, something like $20 million. And they were going to fall $2 million short of spending that. They were only going to spend like $18 million. And so the school said, well, we have to spend all $20 million. We have to. Because then if we don't, when we go back for the budget, they're going to be like, oh, you clearly don't need as much. You didn't spend your full allotment. So the incentive is to be as unproductive as possible. Instead of the way you and me would spend our money, if we're building a home, we would say we're going to do it in the most efficient way possible because we had to work for the resources and put our own sweat equity in to get the resources to build this home. And we have to build this home, or we're hiring people to build this home. And so we want it to be as efficient as possible. But as soon as you have the government intervene, it's the exact opposite. And everybody knows it. You tell that story to everyone and they're like, oh yes, of course, right. And so then when you even matriculate down to then here's me as the captain of the debate team, we have a small budget. Well, 1 year, we're $1,000 left in the budget. And what are we being told? You got to spend that money or else they're going to cut your budget $1,000 because it's fake money. It's monopoly money. It's the government's money. You know, it's not money that I would never do that with my own money. But when it's, oh, well, we're just getting handy. Now think of that happening millions upon millions of times every month, just in the United States. That inefficiency, everybody understands it. Everybody knows. They know when it's government money that it's like, yeah, whatever, wasteful, who gives a shit. And that's one of the things today, just the sheer scale of it. We live in a society where you legitimately could have arguments with people where you're like, hey man, they're sending $9 billion of humanitarian aid to Gaza. $9 billion. And the response that you're likely to get is, that's a drop in the bucket. I mean, it is fucking surreal, the scale of it. What is it now? They're estimating, is it up to over $100 billion of the COVID spending was fraud? They're estimating something like 20% of the money sent out of COVID, they're saying now went to fraudulent. I mean, it's unbelievable. And yet, knowing all this, these people still argue. They create the problem, like the whole COVID situation. Like, there is not a better real life example of the failures of socialism and communism than the reaction to COVID. We had big government intervention to lock people down, to tell people they couldn't go engage in their own private enterprises and, have their own small business, their own labor, their own job. Couldn't do it, locked them down, then said, oh, we've created a problem. We've locked people down. Well, now, Mr. Conservative, can't you see those people are struggling? So we have to send them money. So let's send them money. Then they send the money. They print the money.
I was watching your stream just now on YouTube, and I checked out some of the recommendations that I'm getting on the side. And there's a video here by the New York Times 1 day ago. You can't arrest homelessness away. New York Times opinion.
Yeah, that's funny.
Isn't that funny?
Destiny. I wonder if it's because I was just on Destiny stream like a week or two ago. He wanted to talk to me about homelessness because of my job and wanted to how many people with mental health disabilities that I work with that had been homeless or that became homeless, etc. And that's we talked about. Look, sometimes you got to arrest homeless people. So I wonder, who knows how that algorithm works, but. My God, it's just, it's so infuriating to me. Like, and that's one of the things, there's part of, and I'm sure you've experienced this, there's part of this like schadenfreude that's like, you know what, why don't you give these people everything they want? Give them the misfortune of getting exactly what they want. It's like the dog chasing the car. Okay, now you got it, now what? Right? And so like, for example, the easiest examples of this is defund the police. Right? It's like, okay, not in my town, but you go ahead. Go ahead, Chicago. Defund the police. Let's do it. I'm 100% behind you. Let's get rid of all police. Let's see how it works out. And there's part of you that's
they're forgetting the second part of the equation. It's they're not so in the United so they don't in New York City they don't defund the police. They defund the police against criminals. But if you are are Perry and you stop the criminal in the subway, or if you are the guy who shot in the air or like shot into the roof when a woman was being robbed and he scared away the robber, the police is not defunded against you. No, you're in Rikers Island, getting molested by gangs. You're not
right. Well,
you're not free to do what you want.
Solzhenitsyn, Solzhenitsyn has that famous quote, right? For the thief to have a knife was just a misunderstanding, but for you it was an act of terrorism. That's exactly right. Exactly. The defending, but I just use this as a metaphor for being like, there's part of me that says, whether it be defund the police or massive socialism, there's part of me that says, just give them what they want for 5 years and then they'll realize, holy shit, this was a bad idea. But the truth is, they'll never say that. COVID's the best example of that. They didn't say.
No, I would, in order to be consistent, I would have to say yes, defund the police.
Oh,
also, every citizen should be
right. But you're coming at it from a different position. Like they're not.
No, and the position is that, but I do recognize that this is not like an easy transformation for New York City. It will, and so the way a polite society gets established, and this is the way it was established in Europe and in many other places, is that there was initially a lot of intertribal warfare. And then over time, all the aggressive people that were no longer necessary because of trade, they had to become bandits and robbers, and they were gradually killed off. They were killed off by citizen militias. And if you look at great societies in the past that were based on trade in Europe and had quiet and peaceful cities, you look at like Scandinavian countries or you look at the Netherlands, you see pictures like here's the Night Watch. So who wore the Night Watch? Here's the guy who owns the granary. Here's the guy who owns the beer hall. Here's the guy who owns this factory. Here's the guy who trades with the farmers. And they all live in the city. And every night, or like once a night, when it's their schedule, it's their shift, they walk out fully armed, decked out in weapons, and in like the best equipment of the time that they purchase themselves. Somebody paints a painting of them, which they commission. That's why we know about them. And they defend their own property, and they, shoot down any people who are, trying to arson or trying to do anything else chaotic, or they arrest them and put them in jail. So they police their own city. But before that, they had centuries of, increased chaos where this system was established. And this high trust society was established by gradually culling all the people who are unstable. Like they would be, quote unquote, physically removed in one way or the other by, either response to their aggression or by being unable to survive in a society based on trade. Now, if you try to do that in New York City, there would be a lot of casualties immediately on day two.
Right.
Because everybody's reliant on the police, on the current system. So defunding it is sort of like dropping people over a volcano. Right? You remove what was holding them up, and now they fall down to their deaths. So I understand it can't be done here
Well, right,
in
yes,
the
and
same way.
there's listen, it's approaching it from a completely different perspective, because when they're saying defund the police, what they mean something completely different. Like you were saying, they don't mean the police don't exist. They mean the police exist to go after their enemies and intentionally allow the people that they view as victims to do whatever they feel is necessary. So much of what this Marxism is, of oppressors versus oppressed, is it's not about equality, and you know this. It's about vengeance. It's about tipping the perceived scales. They say one side has the upper hand right now. We seek to reverse that. So when they say that they want to defund the police, what's really being said is we want to remake the police in our image, to be our personal Gestapo. That's what they want, to allow us to get away with whatever we want.
As one famous South American fascist used to say, for our friends, everything.
Yep.
For our enemies, the law.
Yeah, and that's exactly it. And so you say to these people, like, well, then fine, give them what they want. It doesn't matter. Defund the police is just one example. But any of this, the truth is, though, they'll never accept it. Their answer will be, I wish that we could, run a simulate, another case of be careful what you wish for. But if you did have the ability to temporarily see into the future and to orchestrate things in a certain way as an experiment to see how things would come out, there is no doubt in my mind that Democrats could win almost universally every single election in every office, state and federal, for the next 50 years. Every single one. For 50 years. And on 51st year, when you looked at all the problems in society, they'd be like, those damn conservatives, those damn libertarians, those damn Trump support. Like, it wouldn't matter. It wouldn't matter. They would continue to double down. Oh, our policies caused this? No, they didn't. The problem was we didn't do them enough. I'll give you an example, like, not a lefty, but do you know who Kevin Castley is?
No.
Or Kevin Castley? He is this, but he used to be on Dylan Burns' show a lot. He is this, he doesn't like the term. He's like a centrist neocon. Huge government interventionist guy.
Yeah, master evader. Got it.
Yeah. He, for example, I had a debate on him. He thinks we should preemptively nuclear strike North Korea, right? Wipe them off the face of the earth. We should do that preemptively. So I had a debate with him on that. I talked to Kevin Castley once about Afghanistan, and I said, we were lied to for 20 years. There was 12 or 13 generals that were in charge of the war in Afghanistan. Each one of them told us, rousing success, it's doing great, the end is near, this country's going to be so far better off, blah, blah, blah. Just a few more months, a few more million, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Within, a week of leaving, the place falls into disarray. The weapons get to the Taliban, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Do you think Kevin Castley, who was a neocon that cheered for that, do you think even for a second he said, oh, okay, well, we screwed up there? No, you know what his solution was? We should have had 50,000 troops stationed there for 50 years. That's it. The problem's not that we intervened, it's that we didn't do it enough. That's his solution. There is no...
No, he is partially right.
Well,
let's be honest here. So it's not, but not in the sense that 50,000 troops. It's in the sense that if you want to conquer an area that is occupied by conquerors, by people whose the major part of their culture for centuries has been preying, meaning attacking trade routes between Asia and Europe, and where they are like a pass-through area with no access to the ocean, no access to trade. The majority of their riches are based on holding mountain passes and being able to fight off intruders. So with that culture, your attempts to change it, they just don't have the incentives to change. Also, they happen to hold one of the more rigid philosophies and religions on the planet right now.
Well, but what you're basically saying is this, and this part of it's true. Yeah, you could win, and you're not going to change their mind with some half-assed.
Yeah, you
but
could
there's
commit a few
no
atrocities and win. Yeah,
right. You could drop a nuke. You could. Yeah, I suppose you could send.
That's too expensive.
Well, yeah, I know, but the argument is you could always go more extensive and solve that problem. The question then becomes, well, what are the other costs of that? I'll give you an example. With COVID, it is true that we actually, the way we did lockdowns was maybe the worst possible thing, because they were half-assed lockdowns, right? If there was any chance for a lockdown to work, which it wouldn't have, but if there was any chance for it to work, it had to be full-throated, and it wasn't. And so basically you were doing shit that it was obvious was never going to help.
No, it's not a full analogy. We've have an entire history in human history of like conquerors knowing what they're doing and taking over areas and completely changing them culturally. The problem is that these are not the people in charge. These are not, and maybe that's good, right? Because that's like a horrible thing to observe. But they were people who would come in, the Mongol Khaganate, for example, would come in, and they would say, well, all men are put to the sword, and they determine that by height, and then they take over. They literally take over society, and they say, this is now the new culture. And there were certain cities where they did that, and those cities are majority their culture now. There were other cities where they came in and said, look what we did to that city. If you don't want the same fate, just pay 10% taxes. 10% of everything you produce, just give it to us once a year, and we'll quote unquote defend you. And that's how human society existed for the very long time with various empires.
That's right.
But now we're living in this world where they sort of they have this stupid belief that all humans and cultures are equal and are just blank slate, and if you just provide them with an opportunity, instead of becoming highway robbers, they would suddenly become highway scholars and go to university and develop the sciences. And that's not what's happening. And so they now have to have a standing army over those people, and that's also doesn't work because it's way too expensive.
Here's the problem. Like, what you're saying is, it's true in this sense, right? That, and I've made this argument many times. There's an argument to be had that if the United States had benevolent, competent people running things, that maybe a world superpower should be the world police. But we don't have that. We don't have good-meaning people. They're horrible people.
No, it's impossible.
What do you mean?
Not just we don't have. The centralized systems don't produce competence.
Well, right. But if theoretically you could, right, then you could say, well, yes, if we had generals capable of being good people and prosecuting this war, then you could have a system where they go into Afghanistan and could have better outcomes and better results. And maybe there's some...
No. That's the thing. We can't go into Afghanistan and change things with our rules of engagement.
Well, yes.
The way people subdued Afghanistan was subdued many times in history. The way it was subdued, every single time that was recorded, was an army would walk in, would get attacked, would defend itself, and would walk into one of the villages and burn it. Not just burn it, but burn everybody inside, make sure nobody escaped, except maybe one old man. And then that one old man would be paraded to a series of the next 10 villages and would explain to them in detail while crying what happened.
Mm-hmm.
And then those people would say, the old man from that village would show up, the real decision makers, and would say, listen, we don't want that fate. What do you want? And then they would come to an agreement. And that would be an agreement that they would uphold. And basically, it would be some kind of, mutual compromise. You bribe them a little bit, you pay them, but also they know that the alternative is your ability to totally exterminate them. And then you have like peace in that region for a certain amount of time. That's how these warlike tribes were dealt with. Now, that's an evil way of dealing with them, obviously. That's like becoming even more evil than them. But that's, an option that's historically recorded.
Right.
We don't have the stomach for it.
Well,
We're not that evil.
That's
so
right.
Be there.
Right. That's exactly right. So that's the morality, but it also requires competence to do that, right? Like, take the morality out of it. You have to have skilled leaders capable of understanding what is necessary. We have neither. We do not have people with the moral fiber nor the competency running. We don't have it. They don't give a shit. They're not there. They're not helping Ukraine because they give a shit about the people of Ukraine. They have another agenda. They see personal benefit to themselves. And they see the people of Ukraine as right now, by propping up in the way they're doing, it's beneficial to them, and at some point it won't be beneficial, and they'll cut and run, just like they did in Libya, just like they did in Afghanistan, just like they did in Iraq. And so the point I'm trying to, I'll just finish. I do have to go here. I do have to go here. So I'll say this real, but the point I'm trying to make with this Kevin Castley situation is, like, you will double down because we shouldn't have been there in the first place. You suggested going. You suggested keeping it going for 20 years. And when it blows up in your face, you don't say, well, shit, the things that I suggested ended up being terribly wrong. You say, the reason is they didn't listen to me enough. We should have went further. And if we would put 50,000 troops there for 10 years more like he suggested, and it still ended up a failure, do you think he would have said, I guess I was wrong? He would have said, no, it should have been.
But there's a problem here. This is the last thing I want to say. This system does not allow, like, one of the things that it's good at, it's been sort of, maybe they do have some historical hindsight, the people in control in general, they don't allow competent generals to rise through the ranks because they know from Roman history, they know what will happen. A competent general will be the superior leader to all of them in the short run. In the long run, it's really bad, but in the short run, they're afraid of that. So the people that get promoted are not like people who are willful decision makers who can solve things. They are slavish compromisers that are controlled. Those are the people that get promoted, including through the ranks of the military. When you have that system, you have the impossibility of a Cincinnatus rising through the ranks. Mm-hmm. He is outlawed by the system, and that's why he has to be a billionaire narcissist like Trump. That's why that's the only shortcut you have of somebody not even competent, but like not slavishly subservient to the system coming into any sort of position of power. It's by like a hack.
Mm-hmm. No, I don't disagree. All right, man, I gotta let you go, then end this and get to bed. It's way too late. I gotta be up in 4 hours. So, but no, I appreciate it, man, as always, and hopefully we'll talk soon. Hope everything's going good for you, man.
Yeah. Thank you.
All right, we'll see you, man. Yep, that's my friend Kasimir.